year compared to 13% last year.
All right, Mike McAllister is diving into the stats. We're looking up basketball. Hey, everybody, we're just
hi people.
Yeah, we're here hanging. We got a good half hour just hang session. We'll be getting on the radio here at noon. We'll get into our pre-games plural coverage then for both Youngstown State and Cal. But we needed to get Mike here early, like the Kiyan stuff yesterday.
They threatened me.
Yeah,
just so you know,
yeah, we did threaten
being
him.
held up.
Just a little bit. Only a little. It was just a light.
It was a little threat, but I'm a pushover, so
that's true.
didn't
Like
take
we were prepared to threaten you more, and you went down easily.
I really did.
Yeah, you buckled quickly. But we knew we needed to get Mike in here. We needed to talk Kiyan. People are really excited about this. Big news last night. I think they've all stopped swearing on a live stream now. Has that? My goodness, I wore out the dump button yesterday during the end.
Only because
the
the live stream ended, but you can go back and watch all the swearing if you want. It's still posted.
It was one like, oh, Lala's on now. I think we might be safe. And like her third word, I'm like, nope. Come on, Lala. What? You're a VJ. What are we? You're an MTV VJ. What
and
are we doing?
Mom.
What are we? There are kids.
You're there as a mom.
This is children's programming. The only one that didn't swear was Kiyan. So there we go. Anyway, but great excitement, right, Mike? I mean, this is like, is he mellow? No. Let's all comment on that. Is he the number one recruit in the country? No. But this is a legitimately, I'd say, landmark moment here early for Red.
It is. The main thing, there's two things here. One, you have the nostalgia and all of that goes along with it, right? Because every Syracuse fan that, has been a fan for decades is going to immediately think back to that season when Carmelo's kid commits. Mm-hmm. So it brings up all of those positive feelings. And so that's obviously a good thing. But Kiyan Anthony is a really good recruit in his own right.
Yeah, he's a legit player.
He is. This is not LeBron getting Bronny a roster spot on the Lakers that he didn't deserve, getting him drafted when he didn't deserve it. This isn't the same thing. It's not pure nepotism. This is Kiyan Anthony being a legit recruit. And the biggest thing for Syracuse is if they had just recruited him as, hey, you're Carmelo's kid, you should come here. I don't think he comes here. The fact that they recruited him with the message basically like, yeah, all that stuff's really cool. We want you regardless of all of that. If your name was Kiyan Jones, we'd still be after you just as hard. And I think ultimately that made the biggest difference in this recruitment.
Yeah, obviously, when you are in Kiyan's position, it's unusual in the recruiting world. I get there. There are a decent amount of sons of former NBA players actually that are going through it right now, probably more than you'd realize. But it's unusual the way it's going through. And just listening to I think Melo talk last night after the decision was made, Melo was like, man, like it was hard. Like I was trying to just be dad. I was trying to stay out of it.
Right.
Like he was in a weird position.
He was, and he admitted, I know more about what's going on at Syracuse than I do with what's going on at other schools. Yeah. Because he's involved. He donates money. He, puts his namesake on the basketball practice facility, all of those things. So because of his involvement, like he could theoretically go to Kiyan and say, listen, they got this going on, mm-hmm. This is coming down in the future. I know all these plans that are going on.
That's my name. It's on the building.
Right. And he can't do that with other schools. And his point was basically he tried not to do that. Mm-hmm. And the thing that stunk from his perspective is it prevented some level of communication with his son mm-hmm. because he felt like saying those things would come across as, you should go to Syracuse because that's where I want you to go. Mm-hmm. And he made it very clear, even right from the beginning, before the announcement, specifically stating, look, there were no side conversations, et cetera, et cetera. This was all his decision. And when he said that multiple times, and then Lala said that a few times, that I knew or really thought strongly it was going to be Syracuse going in. I don't think they emphasized that as much as they did if it was USC, because there'd be no reason to. Right. If he decided USC, there's no question as to whether or not this was really Kiyan's decision or not. The fact that it was Syracuse made those comments in their minds necessary to be like, hey, look, he picked Syracuse, which is where I went. This was not because I'm forcing him to go there. And so watching the whole thing, even though it did drag out a little bit.
Just a little.
Just a little, but they always do. I've seen enough of these announcements when it's a situation like this where it's as publicized as it was, or whether it's a kid streaming on Instagram Live at a little ceremony at his high school. There's always multiple adults that talk for way too long about things no one is watching for. It's always going to happen. It's annoying. It's not changing.
And none of them were debuting season 2 of their podcast.
No, that's right. This one was.
I'm still confused why the podcast called 7 p.m. in Brooklyn starts at 5:30. I'm never going to figure that out.
I don't.
I'm thankful it did because it landed during my show, so that was nice. But I don't know why it's called 7 p.m. in Brooklyn if the show's not at 7 p.m. and in
it's a
Brooklyn.
line, I think. Like
is it a line from something? Am I just not hip?
I guess.
That's very possible.
I'm not either, but I thought I heard someone say it's a line in a rap song or something.
Well, that would...
And I said, okay, I'm unfamiliar. I tried searching to see if I could figure out where that was. I was unsuccessful. So
I'd say if it is, you could still stick to it.
You could.
It's still a time and a place.
It is. It is. And that was the funny part is I had a few comments. I posted an article yesterday morning that was basically, here's how you watch.
I spent literally the last week thinking it was at 7 until yesterday morning.
Until it was Thursday. It was Thursday at one point when I was putting the article together on how to watch it. I was going to post yesterday morning. And I started seeing that, no, it's actually starting at 5:30. And I'm like, well, but why? You control when it's posted.
Yeah. That's
7 p.m. is in your title.
And especially since it wasn't live.
It wasn't a live thing. It was a tape thing that they were just posting at that time. So that was the kind of interesting thing because I did have a few fans that responded to my posts and said, well, wait a minute. Your thing says 5:30, but it says 7 p.m. Like, well, no, 7 p.m. is just the title of the show. Yeah. That's not the actual time. The time they're doing it is at 5:30, although you could have waited till 6 o'clock to watch the actual announcement part.
Right, that came right at 6.
Yeah, so it was, I understand the confusion. I don't know if I'm correct in terms of the 7 p.m. in Brooklyn being a line in a rap song. That's what I saw somewhere.
If it's not yet, it should be.
It might be now.
Mello gets in rap songs a lot. I mean, he can put his podcast in a rap song. All right, let's take, there's various different offshoots of this, which I find fancy. There's on-court stuff, there's off-court stuff, there's recruiting effects. All right, so now Mello's kid is here, a.k.a. Mello's probably going to be around a little bit, one would imagine.
Yes.
To watch his son play basketball.
Him and Lala will be in the stands quite a bit starting next year.
I'm intrigued to see if they have to make like new seats for them. There's logistics with Mello.
Weitzman's old seats.
There you go. Like when Mello's around, you do need at least a little security, a little space.
Yeah.
I've dealt with Mello's security before. Large fellow, the time I dealt with him.
Yeah. I'll have to try to prevent myself.
Very polite.
Fangirling over there.
Very polite to the time I dealt with him, but large enough that I listened. That was at a football game. It was at one of the MetLife Stadium games. He was just standing there. I'm like, I'll see if I can get Mello on.
Yeah.
And this very, very large man was like, Mello's enjoying a private evening. I'm like, okay.
I'll write that.
I'm like, yes, that's sir. Enough. Hey, Ryan Nassib, I know you. He's not about to not enjoy a private evening. Anyway, so as far as future recruiting,
yes.
What is this? Does this do anything for the rest of this class, for future classes, because of relationship to Team Mello, because people are just excited? What do you think this does?
Well, anytime you get a recruit with name recognition, it helps.
Yeah.
Now, Kiyan Anthony is, like I said, a legit recruit. He's a top 35 recruit for a reason, not just because of who his dad is. And anytime you get a player of that caliber, you think about Sadiq White, who committed previously and signed a few days ago.
Mm-hmm.
He was a big name and a big get for Syracuse. And Kiyan Anthony makes his addition put Syracuse as the 5th ranked recruiting class in the 2025.
Right. With 3 4-stars now.
Correct.
Including the Australian kid, Fennell.
Right. So it helps because I don't think they want to be done in 2025. I think they want a big, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that Alex Constanza kid who took an official visit. He's technically in the 2026 class right now, but
might reclassify.
That's still technically on the table. So anytime he is a 5-star in 2026. So he's an elite recruit. Anytime you're trying to attract an elite recruit, saying, hey, look, you've got other really good players that are coming as well. You want to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly helps. The biggest thing is, I think Syracuse, in order to capitalize on the name recognition and the recruits coming in and whatever, they have to win. And that doesn't mean that you have to win the national championship. It doesn't mean you have to make the Final Four, but you have to be at least a representative team. I think that means you need to be
to tournaments.
You have to, right. So I understand Syracuse is 2-0, and a lot of people are unhappy with the way they've looked in those 2 games. I get all of that. But it is still only 2 games. I've seen a lot of teams not look good early in the season and finish out looking pretty good. Teams can improve and get better as season goes along. Let's assume that happens and Syracuse gets to the tournament this year. Now you've got 2 years of Red Autry. In the first year, they won more games than they had in the last few.
Yep, 120.
Despite significant injuries, not really having a big man, and rumors that things inside the locker room weren't perfect. Then, year 2, in the offseason, you get a McDonald's All-American as a recruit.
Mm-hmm.
You get several new players in the transfer portal. You meld all that together, get back to the tournament. In that same time period, you recruit a top, let's even say it drops a little bit, stays in the top 10, a top 10 recruiting class in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting to get some momentum here.
Right.
And Syracuse is starting to get back to what it had been during, sort of the golden era of Jim Boeheim. And that all of that positive momentum is good and helps with future recruiting. Kiyan being an example of that. So I think it's important for Syracuse to capitalize on that positive recruiting momentum and that name recognition and all of that by having a good season this year. If they don't, that's not to say that all of that goes away, but that makes it easier for other programs to recruit against you. Yeah, look, they've got talent on the team right now, and they still didn't do anything. So it's easier to negatively recruit against Syracuse if the team on the court is not producing. If they do, on top of the wins they've had on the recruiting trail, then you're really starting to get things going.
All right, so this brings up a conversation we have a lot with the chat here and on the show, with the modern era of the portal and how rosters are built. Because I remember, I think Red said it, like we talk about the class that's mostly gone now, that only Chris Bell's left. That was a 6-member class. And
right.
They've always, it's like you're never going to see classes that large again. And now we're talking about maybe having a class that large again, like 2 years later. Like, does that mesh right in this era where you probably, regardless of this, do need some immediate impact guys out of the portal realistically every year, regardless of what's going on?
Well, see, I think it might be, I don't know about 6, but if you get 3 to 4 recruits and you can get half of them to pan out,
right,
then you combine that with grabbing, a handful of portal guys, and that can sort of be a way that you build your roster. Now, the challenge to that is when you have that many moving pieces every year, it makes it more difficult for continuity guys. Part of the reason that when you play some of these teams like the Lemoynes and the Colgates and whatever, especially early in the season, why those teams seem to have a leg up on you is that a lot of those guys stick around for 3-4 years and play together for 3-4 years in the same program, in the same system, with the same coaching staff. Whereas a lot of these high major programs, even the elite ones, have so much more turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I think, why you think about John Calipari and when he was at Kentucky. And they always were a good team, but they were so inconsistent. They would always have an elite recruiting class. They would always have a ton of 5-stars on the roster.
But that's all they had.
Right. But then some years they would be a legit top 10 team all season and a high seed in the NCAA tournament. Some years they'd be a 7, 8, or 9 seed.
Mm-hmm.
And the inconsistencies is because it's difficult to build continuity and cohesion when 3/4 of your roster is changing over every single season. And I think the transfer portal era makes that much more prevalent at the high major programs than it does the non-power programs. Because if an elite recruit comes and doesn't play a ton in year 1, he's like, see, I'm going to go somewhere where I am. And that happens where someone just isn't happy for whatever reason. There's no sticking it out, waiting a couple of years, developing. That doesn't happen anymore. Being okay with being a backup for 2 or 3 years before becoming a starter, that stuff doesn't happen anymore.
Very rarely.
Right. So it makes it much more difficult to build a program. And that's, I think, some of the challenges that Syracuse is facing right now is trying to find that right balance. And Red, as a new head coach, is trying to find that right balance. So, that all of that plays into it with the transfer portal, et cetera. But I do think if you're Syracuse, that trying to get 3 or 4 recruits every single cycle makes a lot of sense, because the more recruits you have, the more chances you have on hitting on enough of them that you have enough good players you can throw out there to win some games.
All right. How important is it to Syracuse? Because you've got the buzz here. How important is it that Kiyan's actually good? Like that he comes here, and I'm not saying he needs to be his dad, but that he comes here and be it a year, be it 2 years, be it 4 years, be it whatever, that he comes here and has a legit I'm good at basketball career.
Yeah, I think that certainly helps your program a ton, because beyond just the getting a 4-star guard, like let's compare him with the Australian kid, right?
Okay.
If you have to pick one of the two that's going to really hit and maximize his potential, for Syracuse, I think you'd rather have Kiyan Anthony be that guy because of the name recognition, the NIL stuff.
1,000%.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, in a perfect world, you'd love for both to be fantastic players and achieve their maximum potential. But yeah, the non-tangible things that can come from Carmelo's kid being a really good player for you are significantly more than just about any other recruit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's certainly very important. That's the biggest thing I think for Syracuse now, is trying to make sure they get enough out of him that he can be, have some level of impact. Now that doesn't mean start and play 35 minutes year one and score 20 points a game. Like I think, to your point, expecting him to be Melo is not fair to him, not fair to Syracuse, etc.
It's not fair to anybody.
Right.
Melo showed up, he was the best player in the country.
Yeah.
From day one, he was the best player in the country.
You could see it in the game against Memphis.
Yeah, freshmen didn't win those awards back then. Nick Collison. No, Carmelo Anthony was the best player in the country. He was the best player in the country on November 1st. He was the best player in the country on April 7th.
Yes.
He was the best player in the country every day of the season, and it was blindingly obvious once that Memphis game happened.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen for
the fact that TJ Ford, I think, was he the one that won it that
Collison,
year?
I think Collison and Ford split him, something like that. Veterans. I mean, they were good players, really good players.
They were good players.
And Melo beat them both in the tournament.
They weren't Melo.
Melo beat them both.
It was just not the same level.
No. I mean, that was you talk about eye test. I remember that Memphis game. Syracuse lost the game. Don't care. Great.
Yeah, no, they're going to be outstanding this year.
Whatever. Yeah, who's this fellow? Because, and this is the other thing I say about Kiyan, and this is where it's so interesting. I remember Melo, the recruitment's wow, they're getting the number 1, number 2 guy in the country. That's cool. But recruiting wasn't then, and this is 20-plus years ago now. It's not what it is now. This Kiyan recruitment, even though he's only the 30th whatever player in the country,
right,
it feels like it has more buzz than anyone, and I don't quite remember this, but going back to legitimate Billy Owens, because he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, or certainly Pearl. I think he might be vaguely, at least in that conversation, as far as hype, not as far as talent or whatever, but as far as wow, this means something.
I'll put it to you from this perspective.
Unless I'm skipping somebody you want to toss in there.
No, I mean,
Johnny Flynn's a higher rank recruit. He didn't have the buzz. Paul Harris, higher rank recruit, didn't have the buzz.
They had local buzz.
It had local buzz, but not like this.
No.
It had buzz, but not quite this.
So the fact that the main ESPN account was tweeting this out.
Yeah.
The fact that the Bleacher Report account was tweeting this. I mean, several outlets that aren't, hyper focused on recruiting and the
November college basketball.
Right. They are tweeting out Kiyan's following his father's footsteps, and they've all got graphics with Carmelo and Kiyan and together. And there was one that I saw with the famous picture of Carmelo holding up the post standard that says champs, whatever.
They put his picture.
They put Kiyan's face on there, and instead of saying Syracuse wins national championship, it said Kiyan commits or something like that.
Mike Waters approved of that tweet. He saw that, and he enjoyed that thoroughly.
I'm sure he did, as would anyone. Yep. I thought it was pretty cool. But those are the types of things that you can't quantify. That doesn't happen if, find whoever the number 1 recruit is in the country this year, and that player commits to Syracuse. This has more buzz than that would.
Yes.
Because of the affiliation, and you get more attention on Syracuse basketball from a national perspective because of this commitment with the name recognition and all of that than I think anyone else in the class that would have committed. So that is huge for the program. It's huge for Red as he's trying to build this. And frankly, I think all of this positivity they really needed, because there are a lot of fans that didn't have a lot of positive feelings after the first time.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back, football, basketball recruiting over the last, since recruiting has become a thing, and trying to, DeVito was big at the time. It wasn't this. Like, I'm trying to think of guys like, Dante Green, Paul Harrison, Johnny Flynn. They were big, but it wasn't this. It wasn't this. Benny Williams was big. It wasn't this. Like, McCullough was big. It wasn't this. This is the different thing, which then leads to this. All right, say he's only the 30th, whatever, recruit in the class. Right. That's still pretty darn good. How good of a player is Kiyan? Like, what kind of basketball player did Syracuse actually get here?
He's really good. He is someone who has grown tremendously over the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, he was a recruit that people were talking about, and he was getting high major offers and those types of things. But there were a lot of people that thought, kind of similar conversation to what you're having with Bronny now as a pro.
Right.
Meaning he's only getting attention because of who his dad is. He's not a recruit that's worthy of it based on his skills.
And especially it being literally like right on the heels of that.
Right, exactly. So that was sort of early on in Kiyan's development. You're talking early high school, like freshman, sophomore. But he has developed a ton over the last 2 years. And that's because of the work that he's put in. I know there's been clips going around of like Kiyan when he was like 9, 10, 11 years old with Melo working on jab steps and bumping defenders off of you and things like that. But, I mean, he's a really smooth athlete. He's skilled. He has improved his three-point shot quite a bit over the last couple of years. He didn't shoot overly efficiently at the EYBL this past year, but he also was relied upon.
He shot a lot. I know that.
He did shoot a lot. But he was relied upon to be the primary shot taker.
Yeah.
So he's a really smooth athlete, has really advanced level footwork, and you start thinking about those jab steps and things like that, those moves that he's worked on with Melo.
Mm-hmm.
Defensively, I think there's a little bit of a question as far as how good he can be.
But you're saying Melo didn't work on him with defense? Or
shocking.
No, that couldn't be.
But he's a really talented offensive player, has a lot of potential. Obviously, once you get into a system like Syracuse, you got other players around you and things like that. He doesn't have to be the guy that takes all the shots.
Mm-hmm.
I think his efficiency numbers will improve in that type of a situation. But he can flat out score the basketball. I think he's going to be a really good scorer. And the biggest thing, is seeing how he handles the ball, how he is out in transition, and then defensively, how good he can be on that end.
Yeah, you start thinking about things like, all right, how would his game meld with like a Chopper Moore on the court or things like that now that you start trying to, work your way toward the future here a little bit. But it's certainly been fascinating times with all this. I'd say one of the number one questions, Mike, I got, and you've brought it up there, and I'm sure you've gotten the same thing. The question is always something that just, this is not another Bronny situation, right? Like, can he play?
Yeah,
yes, he can play.
The thing is, Bronny could play in high school.
Yeah, and he had a heart condition last year that would set him back.
That I think hurt what he would have been in college is the heart condition, which impacted his ability to practice and really develop a rapport with his teammates. And so I think from his perspective, it would have been most beneficial to come back for a second year and then really try to get that college experience, become a starter, play significantly, show that you've got some skills, etc. But that clearly wasn't the plan, and it didn't matter whether or not he deserved to be drafted because he knew he was going to be.
Yeah. So, never has the 53rd pick or whatever it was in the draft been more certain.
I know.
I didn't know who was going number 1. I knew who was going 53.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. The thing is, when you're comparing Kiyan to Bronny, the situation of Kiyan coming to Syracuse is not equivalent to Bronny going to the Lakers.
No.
Both were very high-level recruits coming out of high school, and how a player translates from high school to college is a mystery regardless of who the recruit is. And so there's going to be a learning curve there for Kiyan. Carmelo said a few times in the announcement yesterday, the work starts now, and he's right, because as much as he's worked to improve his game and become a really high-level recruit and all of those types of things, he has to continue to work in order to be ready as possible for college. And then when he gets here, there's going to be things that he hasn't seen before that are going to be thrown his way that he has to adjust and react to. All of that's true, but this is certainly not a situation where he's being overly inflated, overly rated, or anything like that because of who his dad is.
No, he's. Again, I'm only watching the highlights or whatever, but I mean, he can play. He can play. He can shoot it. He can. And you can see on his frame, too, he's got room to fill out a little bit, right?
He does, yes.
Like Melo, realistically, it was about this year in Melo's life where he went from a little scrawny to, a bigger dude.
That's really where he developed as a high school prospect.
Yeah.
It was kind of between his junior and senior year. He filled out, got stronger, et cetera. So you're hoping that Kiyan will do similar things. And, hey, if he grows a couple inches and becomes 6'7", even better.
That'd be helpful.
That'd be amazing.
Who's to say? I mean, he's 17. He might have another inch or two in there. If not, what is he? 6'5" already? 6'4"?
Yeah, he's 6'4", 6'5", depending on what recruiting service you're looking at.
I mean, you see him. Melo is a legit 6'8".
Yes.
You see Kiyan stand next to Melo. I'll believe 6'4", 6'5". I mean, it looks right.
Yeah.
You never know with some. With Melo, it's the rare person. I'm like, I actually have stood next to him. I believe how tall he is.
He is legitimately 6'8".
No, he's a large man.
You watch these guys on television, right? And so I'm 5'10", so I've never been over 6 feet tall. Always wanted to be over 6 feet. Never got there. But you watch the guys on television, you're like, yeah, what's really the difference between 5'7" and 6'7", or 5'10" and 6'7"? It's not that big of a difference, is it? And then I had floor seats to Syracuse Georgetown game years and years and years and years ago before I started covering the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched Wes Johnson walk by.
Yeah.
And I went, holy crap.
Yeah. And he's, what was he, 6'8", 6'7"? Yeah.
Right. And then Leo Routens walked by. He was there because, Andy was on the team, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, holy crap. And then Arinze Onwuaka walked by, and I went, holy crap.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't understand until you really stand. They are monsters.
That's what
legitimately.
Thinking of Arinze, I remember that Oklahoma game in the tournament. Yep. So game starts, and I saw Arinze standing next to Blake Griffin, and Arinze looked tiny. I'm like, I know Arinze. Arinze's huge.
He is large.
They are so screwed.
Yes.
And then they were very screwed. I'm like, Blake Griffin's that big? Oh God, no.
Yeah, he was different.
Yeah. I'm like, Arinze is a large individual.
He's a very large human.
Why does he look so small?
Yeah,
he looks tiny right now. All right, we're getting closer and closer here. We're gonna high noon here. We'll fire up. We'll get the radio involved and get going here. Football and basketball. Busy day here, Mike.
I know. I can tie Oklahoma back to Melo if you want.
I mean, he beat Oklahoma in at the then Pepsi Arena.
And what I remember from that game is Carmelo was torching Oklahoma, and Oklahoma sent in a goon off the bench to hip check him into the scorers table, and a common foul was called and nothing else. Yeah. He literally came in, and as Melo was jogging up the court, just came in and bodied him to try to hurt him so that he would get off his game from then on.
Yeah,
and then Syracuse continued to dominate.
Yeah, and then Melo torched that guy too.
Right,
he torched everybody.
But that was it was Calvin Sampson was their head coach, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it would have been Sampson at the time.
Yeah. So that was.
They had Hollis Price was their point guard.
I have never had respect for him after that.
Yeah,
still don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they dominated that Oklahoma team. They were like a zone. This is interesting. I was unaware you guys were going to play a zone today.
He had the same look on his face that Tom Crean did when Indiana lost to that Dome team several years later when the Michael Carter Williams team went to the Final Four.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't know you guys were playing this today. Oh, you didn't know?
When did this happen?
It's like interesting.
A new wrinkle from Jim Boeheim. Never heard that
you've concocted a new defense. We should have prepared for this. Interesting. All right, let's hit some buttons here and make sure.
Owner Jim Ash today. Jim, what does a point guard employee offer the greater Central New York market?
Point guard advisors people have the experience and ability to recognize the financial needs of a business.
Oh, we're staying right here.
A plan
I just need to hit a few buttons so the words go on the radio.
From one of our companies or from one of our network of partner businesses.
Mere seconds, people. And all of you people, just stay right there.
How does
Same
having
stream.
the right CPA
Don't do
and
anything.
accountant impact a business's plans?
Since I also operate my accounting firm, I highly emphasize the importance of having a high-quality CPA on your professional team. CPAs operate as trusted advisors. They help businesses run an efficient business process
Mitch
that
on YouTube is going to Berkeley
cash
for the
flow
game.
And at the same time, properly rewarding employees.
San Diego Cuse is already out there.
Point Guard Advisors, a company that can assist and always help your business score.
Actually,
the conversation started today at 370-9965 or visit Point Guard Advisors.
Syracuse, WSGO Oswego, W249BC Mattydale, W261AC Oswego, WTKWHD2 Bridgeport, ESPN Radio. This is the Burdick Ford and Burdick Toyota pregame show.
That it is. The pregame show for what, you might ask? For everything. Brian Higgins and Mike McAllister with you. We got an hour in front of us today as we're going to get you ready on this busy Cuse game day for Cuse and Youngstown State. Basketball in the Dome 1 hour from now, and then 3 hours from now out in California, closer to 3:10 is going to be a kick time today for Syracuse and Cal. This is the first, Mike, I can remember, the bi-coastal two-sport day, slightly later in the day doubleheader.
Yeah, this is the world we live in with conference realignment.
Yeah.
With things like this. And first time Syracuse and Cal have played in almost 60 years.
Yeah, and the first time Syracuse and Youngstown State have played, full stop, end of the sentence.
Which seems weird, right?
They're not far away. They're in Ohio.
No, I don't know why I could have sworn that Syracuse played them at some point, but obviously they haven't. I'm remembering incorrectly, or maybe I played them on a video game or something.
That could have happened. They are the Penguins, which is kind of electric.
That's a cool name.
Yeah, I like that. I'm vibing with the Penguins. So what we're gonna do here is, if you're just joining us, we've been hanging out for the last half hour on Cuse Sports Talk. We've talked every angle of Kiyan Anthony's commitment. So if you missed any of that, we may graze on it here, but do go back and check it out on the archive, and clips will be out there on the various social medias wherever you find your Cuse Sports Talk, be it on Twitch, be it on YouTube, be it on Twitter, be it on the Gram, be it wherever you want. Follow, subscribe, all the things. Do all of the things to get into that. So, Mike, it's one of these things here where we've got these two games, so I guess we should take them in order. We've got basketball coming up first, then football at Cal. Where are you at with this basketball team right now? They're 2-0. As I keep saying, the facts tell me that Syracuse is 2-0.
That is a fact.
That is a factual statement. Does it feel factual? Even though I know it's true. Do you feel that way right now? Because it's never has a 2-0 team felt less like 2-0 than I think we felt around here for the last week or so.
This is how I feel. Kiyan Anthony. That's all that matters. Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
So listen, it's 2-0. And here's the silver lining, okay? So I understand there are a lot of Syracuse fans not overly thrilled with what they've seen the first two games. It is better to be not overly thrilled with what you've seen, but be 2-0 than not be overly thrilled and be 0-2 or 1-1. Because if you were 0-2 and 1-1, I think it would be exponentially worse.
100%, million%.
Right. That said, now I do think there are some good things that we've seen from this team. I'll start with offensively. I think they've been pretty good offensively. And they haven't even really shot the ball well from the outside, especially Chris Bell. So I feel like they're...
And we know he can shoot.
We know he can shoot. I think JJ is going to be a better shooter this year. And I think there's a couple other guys that can shoot from the outside as well. So I think by the time the season ends, this is going to be a pretty good, maybe top 25, top 30 caliber offensive team.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest issue is defensively. They've struggled keeping guards in front of them, and it's Colgate and Lemoyne. And the biggest, I guess, area of confusion to me, I didn't expect them to be a great interior defensive team. Like Eddie Lampkin, for as good as he is offensively, has never been a terrific rim protector.
No, that's not his game. He's not an elevator for the the block shots. He had 7 block shots last year.
I was hoping that, a guy like Donnie Freeman, being 6'10", 6'11", long, a little bit more athletic and a better lateral movement, would be able to help with that a little bit.
And maybe he will be, but he's a freshman. He's not been ready to do that yet.
So it's, anytime a freshman, regardless of how talented they are and how they translate to the college game, it's different for every single player. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, there's some level of a learning curve. And I think Donnie's experiencing some of that right now. Doesn't change anything about what I think about Donnie, by the way, what I've seen the first 2 games. I think he's incredibly talented, and I think he's going to be a really good player here. But the biggest issue is defensively. I read a stat that our colleague Tim Leonard posted on social media this morning that said 37% of Syracuse opponents' first field goal attempts this year have been in transition, which is the most of any power conference team. That is a lot. And so, Reds made the comment in the postgame after the win over Colgate that transition defense was the biggest issue. And that stat would certainly point to he's probably right. You look at the raw field goal percentages that Lemoyne and Colgate had, okay, but you give them so many easy opportunities, and Colgate blew a lot of those in the last game.
Mm-hmm.
You can't keep doing that. That has to change. Even if they're not a fantastic half-court defensive team, even if you can just get them to like average as a half-court defense, but you're better in transition, with how good this team can be offensively and how they pass the ball and things like that, I think that can be good enough to make you a tournament caliber team. The problem is what we've seen in the first 2 games hasn't suggested that they're at that level of being an average defensive team. If they want to show signs of that, I think that starts today. You beat Youngstown State by 20-plus points. You limit their transition opportunities. They don't shoot a huge percentage against you. And I think all of those negative feelings that a lot of the fan base is having right now will start to wane a little bit.
You know, I look at this, and it's clearly the biggest issue of the team right now because, you know, we are seeing things in Red. I mean, Red was fired up to start postgame the other day. He was. I don't know who he was yelling at, but he was getting in on it. Like,
probably me.
Like they're rebounding the ball better than a lot. Yeah, they're getting rebounds. They're getting points in the paint. That's all great, but you know they got just hammered in transition points by Colgate 22-2, and in a game where they only turned it over 7 times, which is disconcerting. In theory, you give up transition points off, you know, turnovers or rebounds the other way. They were giving up transition off made baskets. It's both. It feels eminently correctable, right? Like run back toward the basket and get in front of somebody. But at the same time, when it literally hasn't happened at all in 2 games, you wonder, okay, this is correctable. When and will it be corrected?
Yeah. So a quick note on the rebounding thing. So last year, when Syracuse played Colgate, they got out-rebounded by 7 or 8 rebounds.
By Colgate.
This year, they out-rebounded Colgate by 9.
Yeah.
So that is about a 16 to 17 rebound improvement from the year before, which is pretty good. And that tells you that they've focused a lot on that in the way they've built the roster and in, you know, the training camp and practice and all of that. To your point about transition defense, a lot of transition defense is simply effort.
Yeah.
It's getting back there and getting in the way.
Yeah. Effort, head on a swivel.
Right.
Pay attention.
When you're the one in a 3-on-1 fast break, it's tough. There's almost nothing you can do that's going to prevent them from scoring outside of them making a mistake. But when they are scoring off of your makes, to your point, that is strictly people not hustling back. And that is very correctable if the players want it to be.
Right.
And so that's the biggest thing is I want to see that effort today against Youngstown State in transition defense. Again, I'm not expecting that means if Youngstown State has 6 3-on-1 opportunities that you're going to stop them 4 times. I'm not expecting that. If you stop them once, I think that's a win. But it's the right after makes, them pushing tempo, getting the ball up the court, and getting easy layups in transition. That's where it has to stop. Because if Colgate's doing it, and then Youngstown State is doing it, the Texases and Tennessees and Dukes and North Carolinas that are up on the horizon are going to do it even more so because their players are, in theory, more talented, faster, etc.
Yeah, Texas is coming up on Thursday, either Texas Tech or St. Joe's. And for people that might poo-poo St. Joe's, they just handled Villanova pretty easily the other day. So those are your 2 games down in New York. And that Tennessee game in the ACC-SEC is just after Thanksgiving, so not that far out in the future. So things to watch out for. I'd say what was shocking, like, yeah, all right, you give up a fast break, a 3-on-1 fast break, whatever. Like, you're supposed to give up points on that. Like, if you don't, the other team screwed up. They were giving up fast break points without numbers disadvantages. Like
that's the issue.
Like you're not supposed to give up a 3-on-3 fast break because that's not supposed to exist. There shouldn't be a it's not like they're running the Roy Williams, secondary break, ball out of the basket and go offense against you.
No, so that's the thing it goes back to the being aware of what's going on, and since Red made a point to call that out during the post-game press conference after the win over Colgate, I have to imagine that's been a focus in practice this week.
It has to be.
And so if it is, you would expect that today you will see marked improvement in that area. And if you do, I think that's encouraging for the way things going forward. If they continue to rebound the ball well, they continue to be good offensively, they show improvement in transition defense, then you say, okay, I'm seeing some things that are improving, and you can sort of see a path to this team, developing and working on things and getting better enough that they can make a run at the NCAA.
I look at it, and we'll get to talking football here in a little bit as we get you ready for football at Cal at 3. It feels like, and I get Syracuse didn't lose, but the weird transition defense like that with basketball almost feels akin to Syracuse football last week, giving up 8 million yards on
right.
power up the middle. It just like
the same thing over and over.
Yeah, like football lost that way. Basketball nearly lost that way. Like, okay, you lose games. Like if you lose a game to a fantastic performance, it's not whatever, but it's like, what were you going to do?
Right.
When you lose the games on simple stuff, it's like it really has to gnaw at you.
Let's flip it around from a football perspective and say that Syracuse had lost that game because Thomas Castellanos avoided sacks and ran for 150 yards by himself.
You're like, well, wow.
What are you going to do? Right? Like, you were in position. He made your guys miss sometime. And honestly, he is talented enough as a runner that he can have games like that. He has had games like that.
He had a game similar to that in the Dome last year.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't put up nearly as many points last year. But the point is, this year against Boston College, it wasn't that. It was, Syracuse, we are running these two plays 47 times.
Yeah.
Good luck stopping it. And they couldn't.
Yeah, Syracuse stopped Castellanos enough. They stopped him so much he's in the transfer portal.
He's already left the team.
Like, that's how much they stopped him.
They benched him after that game, and he left the team. And again, if you had told me going into that game, Boston College was going to have 60-some-odd passing yards and throw an interception.
Yeah, Syracuse wins that game every time.
Win easily.
Yeah.
And nope. But from a basketball perspective, again, you should know now that teams are going to try to push tempo against you after makes and misses immediately, because you've shown that is an area where teams can get a one-up on you. So this game in particular, you should see that be a hyper-focus of this Syracuse team.
Yeah, and especially since, like, part of what Red is saying is the identity of the team. He wants to push tempo, and he does, and that's great, and we're for it. That's exciting. But part of that is you have to be aware that the tempo's coming back at you.
Yeah, 100%.
You don't get to push it all in one direction. That's not how it works.
And if you're practicing that in practice, pushing tempo, in theory, you should also be practicing defending it, because
in theory.
You're
half of your team's on the other side,
right?
The scrimmage.
Right. So, in theory, again, that should have been a hyper focus this week, and I don't think that Red thought going into the season of potential defensive issues they could have, that transition defense after makes would be as big of an issue as it has been in the first two games.
No, it did not remotely occur to me until it happened 8 million times in a row.
Right.
Last game. All right, let's get our first break out of the way. We're with you up until 1 o'clock. Then you'll get into watching and listening to both games today. The two-sport bi-coastal basketball football doubleheader with Youngstown State and then Cal out on the West Coast. A little more basketball talk when we come back, and then we'll turn our attention to football in the back half of the show today. Be sure to get in the chat and join us on Cuse Sports Talk as well. We'll step aside for a few. Back after this on Cuse Sports Talk and ESPN Radio. Yes, whoever asked after, and Paul, where did the lower third go? After the football game is over, get back to Q Sports Talk. We'll post-game both shows, or both games. It will be a Q Sports Talk exclusive. Thank you, Paul. Because the Crunch are on the radio later. That's how much later in the day we are. It'll be a little bit old by then, but we'll run back Red's post-game presser at some point during it. We'll get you some Fran Brown sound from the West Coast. Phone lines will be operational so we can chat, and we will chat in the chat. So we will do, when football is over, we're going to fire up Q Sports Talk. It'll be dark out by then, so I'll probably turn on the Labatt sign, just, vibes. And we'll see if we all had a good day or a terrible day.
What conference is McNeese State in? Do you remember?
The Southern?
Is that what it is?
Like, Quadier's not, he doesn't start, he barely plays.
He barely, yeah, I know. I saw someone posted.
That's weird, right?
It's not that. Someone posted that, he's second on their team in field goal percentage. But
yeah, I think his one good game came against, like, literally, like, a Catholic high school or something. I mean,
Southland, not Southern.
Yeah, Southland? I knew it was something like that.
You were closer than I was. McNeese.
Is Paulie joining post game? No. See, you just stuck with me, CBW. You were stuck with me post game. Jordan will be popping
13
in.
13 minutes a game, averaging 5.5 points a game. So, yeah, he's shooting 58%.
Yeah, and almost all his points came in the one game, right?
Yeah.
Like his first 3 games were 0, all his points, and then 0.
So they beat South Dakota State, or no, they lost to South Dakota State game by 7, and Copeland played 13 minutes off the bench, scored 0 points, and was 0 for 1 shooting. Then they played Christian Biblical Studies of something.
Yeah, that's the game where Quadir went off against Christian Biblical Studies.
He had 17 points and 7 rebounds on 7 of 9 shooting in 22 minutes. Then they played Alabama and only lost by 8. Honestly, that's a pretty good performance. But he played 5 minutes, was 0 for 2 shooting, and didn't score. So in games not against Christian Bible Studies of the whatever,
like, is that a real
0
team?
for 3 shooting on and has played 12 total minutes.
Yeah, for a guy that was worried about playing time here last year.
Right.
When he was playing like 25 minutes a game.
And he can't get on the floor at McNeese State.
Yeah, Buddy went off last night, Gavendo. 12 threes.
I cannot believe he can't stick. The Pistons stink.
Yeah.
And you can't play that guy?
Like,
they are bad.
Like, it's weird. Like, now, I get making Oklahoma City's roster is a different ball of wax, but
I couldn't believe he couldn't find a spot on the Pistons.
Yeah, and I realize that they don't play a whole ton of defense down in the G League, but considering that shooting threes is the number 1 most important skill in basketball right now.
He seems to be good at that.
Like, he seems to be excellent at the number 1 most important skill in the sport that he's playing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think there's a lot of like politics and salary and, well, this guy was a high draft pick, so we have to keep him on the roster type of situations going on.
I'm sure there are. They got a lot of roster spots. Like, for all your rosters, you can't find one?
For a guy that can shoot like that? And if you watch him, too, it's not like they pass it to him and he's wide open and he takes 27 days to get a shot off. His shot is quick.
Yeah, he's got a real quick release.
Now,
I don't know if he can guard anybody at all.
I have no idea.
Yeah, because, he'd be
but there are a lot of guys in the NBA that can't guard anybody.
Yeah, but if he could go up and shoot 40 to 45%.
And again, I'm not saying start him playing 40 minutes.
No.
Well, he can't come off the bench and play 12 minutes a game for you and maybe hit a couple threes.
Like, every team in the league needs a couple of bench shooters.
Kyle Korver couldn't defend anyone for his whole career, and he stayed in the league for 15 years.
Yeah. Minnesota Dan's calling you out for being more optimistic about the Hoops team than you were a few days ago. How do you respond, Mike?
I respond with, in the moment, listen, I'm finding silver linings. That doesn't mean that I'm all hunky-dory.
There we go.
This is the Burdick Ford and Burdick Toyota pregame show.
We should be calling it the pre-games show. We are in advance of all of the games here today. Brian Higgins, Mike McAllister with you. We're talking hoops. We'll get to football here in a little bit. And, Mike, it's only 2 games, and they are 2-0. But I think what we've seen a lot so far, and this, I think, is a lot to do with the transfer portal era. And with this specific team, it may be something to do with the Chance Westry situation, because who knows that based on what
he's available again today.
Yeah, sure. Based on what you thought you were going to have and what you thought your rotations were going to be. What do you make of like the different lineups? Like Reds, it feels like he's used a ton of lineups here, still kind of searching for what's going to be. All right, here's how we're going to attack things going forward.
Yeah, and throwing Chance back into the mix kind of puts another wrinkle into that, because you didn't get to see him during the exhibition season, so seeing how he fits and where he could play, like that's a whole other level of how do you figure out the rotation and the substitution patterns and things like that. But, Chance Westry feels like he could be someone that kind of gives this team a spark. And I don't know if he's going to play today. I was a little surprised he didn't play at all against Colgate. Maybe it's because that game was too close, and if Syracuse had gotten up by 15, 20 points, that would have been a situation where Red would have thrown him out there for a little bit.
Paulie's report from courtside is he still hasn't seen his knees because he had his warm-up pants on the whole time.
I didn't know that we were stalking his knees.
Well, or his shins. It was not a knee-specific thing, but he's not seen him without the warm-ups on yet.
But
he scored 11 warming up at halftime, though. Paulie was counting.
That's good.
Yeah,
that was.
I don't know how he got 11. I don't know if that was a 3 or a free throw, but
I don't know.
Yeah.
But can they add that to their total?
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
But listen, I think this year's team I understand the frustration. It has not looked great in the first 2 games. When you're Syracuse, you expect to beat Lemoyne by 20+. You expect to beat Colgate by 20-30. I mean, for 50 some odd years, Syracuse beat Colgate by 30, 40 points every single game.
Right.
It wasn't competitive. In the last handful, it's been extremely competitive. And Colgate's won a couple of them.
Yeah, they were way closer to 0-4 than 4-0.
Yes, much closer. So I understand the frustration and all of that. But sports are weird in that what you see from week 1 is not necessarily what you're going to see towards the end of the season. And so, yes, there was someone in the chat who was saying I was more negative on this team after the loss to Colgate earlier in the week than I'm sounding right now.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is emotionally disconnecting and trying to be more logical from immediate aftermath of a game.
Like the true professional media member you are.
I mean, if you want to see me not act like a professional, watch my tweets during an Eagles game. I cut the entire team every single game.
That's true. The Eagles played on Thursday, so we won't get that this Sunday.
That's right.
It's sad for us.
The nonsense was Thursday night. And
you won. You're welcome for Saquon.
They're 8-2. They've won 6 in a row.
Eagles fans are very miserable about this 8-2 team that's leading the division.
Yes, I know. Probably jaded from last year when they were 10-1. I said this isn't a good football team. Trust me.
The Giants will not lose this week.
Good for you.
Yeah,
that's a good weekend.
Bye week.
So, but anyway, so back to Syracuse. So I try to look at things and say, okay, well, I understand it hasn't looked great the first 2 games. How can this thing get better? What are the silver linings? What are the positives that you can look at where you can see some things going forward? So this Syracuse team has shown improvement in rebounding, which was a major issue last year.
Significant improvement.
Right. I think they have more shooters than what they did last year, even though we haven't really seen it a ton. But they pass the ball much better offensively than they did last year. There isn't the ball-dominant guard that kind of, is the offense.
I kind of wish JJ would be more dominant with the ball.
Yeah,
but
I think
at the same
he can be
time,
more aggressive offensively.
Yeah,
for
you don't have a Judah for the good and the bad.
Right,
of that.
right. So, yeah, listen, it hasn't looked great, and there are certainly some signs of concern from a defensive perspective. But if you're looking at how can this thing get better, one of the ways is you fix some of the transition defensive issues, and you continue getting into a rhythm and rounding into form offensively, because I don't think they've played to their capabilities offensively, even though they've been fine the first 2 games. And that can be a team that is competitive. If the defensive issues don't improve, and I understand a lot of the signs that we've seen in those first 2 games, if there's no improvement in defense, including transition defense, it's going to be a very long season. It doesn't matter how good the offense is if the defense can't stay in front of anybody.
Yeah, you can only score so many.
Right. And so if you have to get to 85-90 to win games, that's something that's going to be very difficult to do consistently, especially in conference play.
Yeah.
If you can win games in the 70s, I know they did that against Colgate, but if you can, when you start stepping up competition, you're playing the Texas and the Tennessees and you get into conference play, and you can play those games in the 70s, those are games I think that Syracuse can win. But in order to get there, you have to be better defensively, because Syracuse is lucky in that if Colgate had been better finishing at the rim, uncontested shots,
you might lose by 15.
They get in the 80s, and Syracuse, I think, loses by double digits.
Yeah. You start looking at it, and it's hard to tell. Jaquan Carlos is the starting point guard. I don't foresee that changing here. But, he's passing the ball fine. His assist numbers are decent. I'm surprised at the defense here, because he was all defensive. He was on the all-defensive team in his conference at Hofstra, and that's not terrible basketball. No. And he hasn't been able to keep anybody in front of him, and Syracuse hasn't played like the real guys you got to keep in front of you yet. So that has really thrown me off, I'd say, about his game here in the early going.
Yeah, there's another element to this, which is you get a new player that's new to your team, a Jaquan Carlos, an Eddie Lampkin, et cetera. Everyone reacts to new environments differently. And it's entirely possible that someone like Jaquan Carlos comes out and says to himself, I'm at a high major school now, and I'm the guy that's being relied upon to be the defensive stopper on the perimeter. I have to get 4 or 5 steals a game, and maybe he's just not relaxing and playing his game yet. He's putting a little bit more pressure on himself.
Again, it's only 2 games.
Right. And so you can ease into that. The other thing to remember is, and sometimes I think this gets lost, is look at a game from a motivation standpoint. That game, means infinitely more to Lemoyne and Colgate than it does to Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to approach that game like it's their Super Bowl. Syracuse is approaching those games like, all right, we're trying to kind of ease into the meat of our non-conference schedule.
Mm-hmm.
We're using these as kind of tune-ups to get to the Texas game, right? And so that motivating factor, I think, can play a part in why Colgate will look a lot better against Syracuse than they do against Cal State Northridge or whatever, whoever they end up playing later on. So, and that's something to consider as well. But listen, I think we'll learn a lot from watching this team today. If they show improvements.
How'd you respond to everything that came out of the last game? The last two games.
If Red was upset and expressed that during the post-game press conference.
Yeah, where do you think
he's not hiding that during practice and talking to the team and talking to his fellow coaches and all of that. That's stuff that's going to come across.
I mean, he walks down the hall from talking to the team. Like, what do you think he was upset about?
Right.
Who do you think he'd just been talking to?
I would venture to guess that he probably had a similar, tone, message, etc., with his team as he did in the postgame press conference, if not harsher.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can say things in those situations a little bit more colorfully than you would in a postgame media press conference with different types of language you can use.
Yeah, like they did on the Mello podcast yesterday.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, what he expressed during the postgame press conference, I don't think is anything new to his team and should be a focus this week. And if those messages are getting through to the team and the team is saying, we need to improve this if we're going to be what we thought we would be in the offseason, you'll see that improvement in this game. So to me, it's Youngstown State, and people say it's Youngstown State, who cares? This game is so important, I think, from a fan base perspective, from a team belief perspective, eye test perspective, to win this game, win it comfortably, and look better in areas that were issues in the first two.
All right, a little basketball talk. That game tips off, about 35-ish minutes from now inside the Dome. ACC Network Extra is your television. TK99, ESPN 1200, of course, for the radio. When we come back, let's get a little football. Syracuse at Cal. We are about 2:40 from kickoff out in California. We'll turn our attention to Game 2 of the doubleheader when we come back after this here on Cuse Sports Talk and ESPN Radio.
Yeah, just to respond to some people in the chat, the thing to remember about the Colgates and the Lemoynes is they have better players now than they did 20, 30 years ago. The other thing is those teams often have much more cohesion than power conference teams.
Yeah.
They're returning a lot more guys. They have guys that have been in the program a couple of years that wait 2-3 years, develop, and then get their shot. They are used to playing together, whereas power conference teams now with the transfer portal have 8 of their 12 roster spots are completely brand new first-year guys, and they're kind of all figuring it out. Now, I also understand Kentucky's roster is entirely new, all 12 guys, freshmen and transfers.
And they beat Duke.
And they just beat Duke.
Yeah.
So, I get it. It's part of the reason, doesn't necessarily make it an excuse. I don't think you should be beating Lemoyne and Colgate by 40 necessarily.
20 would be nice. 15.
Yeah, it shouldn't be what it was. And ultimately, that's what your goal is. And so the biggest thing is today to not make it a third one of those, even if you win.
No.
Winning doesn't – a loss is horrible, but a close win doesn't really do anything. A convincing win – helps you feel a little bit better.
Think back to last year. Now that was a different case, right? It was new, the team was new in that it was Red was new to the position, but most of the team was the same. You had 3 nip and tuck games to start the season that were kind of uninspiring, and then you went to Hawaii and just got smoked by Tennessee and Gonzaga.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, we'd like to see a little something. I don't think Texas is as good as either of those two teams were last year, but they're good enough that if you're not ready for it, they'll put up 100 on you.
But here's the thing with the Tennessee game. That felt like they were right in the game.
Yeah, that was a game for 25 minutes.
Yeah, for more than a half. Like, you were kind of right there. And Gonzaga, it never really felt like it was. Even the Tennessee
Gonzaga
game
was the flip. Like, you got down early, and then it was kind of even. But
yeah, then they made a little bit of a run to make it interesting. Then Gonzaga responded with a run. It never really became. But the Tennessee game, it felt like they were competitive for almost 2/3 of the game.
Yeah.
And then it kind of got away from you. But even watching the game, even when it was competitive, it still felt like it was inevitable that Tennessee was going to run away with it. It just felt that, like, to me, just watching it, I'm like, they're a lot better than Syracuse.
It's like, when's it going to happen?
Right.
And then it happened.
Right. Then it happened. So.
Do I think Chapa and Westry will stay? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. Westry, he's more of a positionless guy, right? I mean, he could play the 1 through the 3. Well, if he can ever play.
If he can play, right.
Luke Fennell, you said yesterday in the chat, Mike, they recruited him as a point guard?
So he's technically a combo guard.
Yeah.
But I know there were, one of the things that Syracuse was trying to get in this class was a point guard. And they had recruited several of them. One kid that ended up going to Kentucky. Syracuse was the first power conference team to offer him, but he ended up, I think his final 3 were like Duke, Kentucky, and North Carolina or something like that.
Yeah.
They targeted that Ian Jackson kid who I think plays on Mello's on Kiyan's AAU team.
Yeah, he's Kiyan's AAU backcourt.
But his stock has really kind of fallen. So Syracuse hasn't really been involved with him for a while. But I think this kid is going to be the one that when you're looking at the class, he's the point guard.
This guy, I mean, it's hard to say with an Aussie guy, right? But like for a guy I'd never heard of until the second he committed. Everything I look at is like he might be like legit.
Yeah, I mean, so I found out about him like a few hours before the commitment announcement, and talked to a couple sources and whatever. And basically, what I learned is Syracuse believes that if he was here in the States, he'd be a top 30 caliber player, kind of similar in rankings to Sadiq White and Kiyan Anthony. That's what they believe talent level wise they're getting. Yeah. I know he's ranked 4-star and like just outside the top 100 and whatever, but international kids are so hard to evaluate.
Yeah, you have no idea.
I mean, Merrick Dolezaj wasn't really highly thought of as a recruit. O'Shea Brissett was kind of
the Canadian kids. Yeah, they were never
even the Canadian kids
never quite ranked right.
Right.
M at 1440 AM. This is the Burdick Ford and Burdick Toyota pregame show.
That it is. Pre-games show. Let's switch paths here. We've talked some hoops. We've talked some Kiyan Anthony commitment to Syracuse, which was the big news of last night. And now here we go. Honestly, as exciting as the Kiyan thing was last night, I still think just based on Fran Brown and all the buzz, and I know some of the shine's coming off here the last few weeks, but man, it feels like Mike, if they go out there and win this game, like, all right, let's go. Like, let's have a little more football excitement to end the year.
Then you feel like you're going to be 8-3 going into Miami.
Into Miami.
I think most people are expecting Syracuse is going to beat UConn. I know UConn is.
They're better than I thought they were.
Yeah, they're 7-3 right now, and they've had a pretty good season. But when you look at their record and who they've played, really their most impressive game was being competitive at Duke.
Right.
That was pretty much it. And Duke is kind of meh. They're okay as far as an ACC team, but they're certainly a better team than what I think most thought. But that's a game that going into it, Syracuse is going to be favored, and if Syracuse plays well, they should win.
Yeah.
Regardless of UConn being better than what a lot of people thought. So this game is such a swing game to me because it changes the potential of 8 or 9 regular season wins and makes it, are you really back to 6-6 and 7-5 again with all of the hype and everything else? It's such a difference in how people will feel about this season is whether or not they win this game.
Yeah, no, I agree with you because, all right, say you lose this game and you lose to Miami and you beat UConn, you're 7-5. It just kind of blends in a bit to the last 2 years.
Yeah, it really does. And so it feels like, well, we had a really favorable schedule.
Yep.
Didn't have to play Florida State or Clemson. I know Florida State is what it is, but,
At the time.
And despite that, and with getting Ohio State's quarterback and Texas A&M's defensive lineman and the buzz and the 4-star recruits and all of that, you still end up back in the same spot. Now, that said, I think the talent and the depth on the roster has significantly improved.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's still reason to be excited about the future. But next year's schedule is pretty tough. You got
Tennessee in the opener.
Notre Dame. I think you got to play at Clemson.
Yeah.
Next
year's schedule's hard.
It's very difficult. Like a 7-5 record next season, you'd be like, wow okay.
Yeah.
All right. That would be a good season from a lot of people's perspective. Fran Brown will have none of that. 7-5 would not be acceptable to Fran Brown, regardless of who you're playing. You could play Georgia 12 times, and he would say 7-5 is unacceptable.
No, 11-1 is unacceptable.
Right. So, but
no bathing.
To his point, I legitimately do think they're like 2 plays away from being 8-1. If they're 8-1 right now,
oh man,
they're a top 20 team, maybe top 15 team. They're right on the fringe of being in the playoff discussion, and they would control their own destiny to the ACC championship game. So I watch what the line is for this game. It's 10 points, and
I don't get it.
I don't either, because look, I understand Syracuse got blown out at Pittsburgh. They got blown out at Pittsburgh because they threw 5 interceptions, like 3 of which were kind of funky.
Yeah. And then they won the next week.
Right. They won the next week in kind of a crazy comeback fashion against a Virginia Tech team that's pretty solid. And, yeah, they lost to Boston College. But, again, 2 of their 3 losses, Stanford and Boston College, were one-score games that came right down to the end, and they were 1 play away from winning those games, either the 4th and 9 that, there were a lot of issues on that play against Stanford, or either the 4th and 1 that Boston College converted into a touchdown, or the onside kick situation. They're that close to being 8-1 or 7-2, and I think people view this team totally different. But because they're not, and because Cal has scored over 40 points in the last 2 weeks, I think there seems to be some sort of inflating on what Cal is, because they had Miami down by a bunch at one point, but then gave up the lead and can't seem to kick a field goal at the end of games to win.
No. 2 losses because of that.
But Cal is not the same caliber of team as what Pittsburgh is, or what Miami is, or anything like. They're not a juggernaut. They really struggle running the football. They're averaging less than 3.5 yards a carry on the season. Their offensive line has given up 9 more sacks than Syracuse's offensive line that's been much maligned. And they just gave up 36 points to a bad Wake Forest team.
Wake's not good.
They're not. Wake, the only game that Stanford has not gotten blown out since they played Syracuse was losing to Wake by just 3. And so Wake, like you said, is not a good football team. And Cal, yes, they scored 46, but they gave up 36. And basically everyone has been able to move the ball on Wake all season. So this is a game where I think, because of Cal's offensive line, some of the issues they've had, that Syracuse should be better defensively against the run at pressuring the quarterback, 2 issues that they've had all season. And the biggest question to me is whether or not the offensive line can protect, because Cal's pass rush has been pretty good so far this season. And if Syracuse takes care of the football and protects Kyle McCord, I think they win the game. It's that it seems to be the same thing every week, but that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, it feels kind of like last week. It feels very possible that last team with the ball goes and wins this game. It feels very similar to that. And I do wonder, because obviously Syracuse...
Unless Cal has to kick a field goal.
Yes, unless they have to kick a field goal. Because unless anyone has to kick a field goal. My
it's
goodness.
not like Syracuse is fantastic in that.
Goodness. Jackson Kennedy did make the one last week, or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. But, man, Andre Schmidt, where art thou? Where are you? But, I look at, the run defense last week. It was a mess. We know all that. I don't know how much of that you can legit fix in a week. BC obviously is very different. BC has a very good offensive line. BC is always their roster is built on that, built on offensive linemen and stuff like that. Cal though has to watch that and be like, we got to try. How can you watch that and not try that game plan?
Yeah, you have to. And they have some talented running backs. The issue is they haven't been able to block for them.
Right.
And their running back Ott, who was supposed to be the big star of their offense this season.
He led the Pac-12 in rushing last year. He's been hurt and bad this year.
Yeah, he's like 2.4 yards a carry or something on the season. And,
not good.
The back that leads the team in rushing is fast, but he's kind of on the smaller side. I think he's 5'10", 180 or something like that.
And that's what he's listed at.
Right, that's what he's listed at.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit on the slighter side. He's not what Syracuse played last week against Boston College, where it seemed like every running back that they had was like 220 pounds and a bruiser, and their offensive line is a bunch of really, really good players. It's not the same. That doesn't mean that Ott can't have a big day. That doesn't mean that the speedy guy can't break a couple of long runs against you. That certainly can happen, but Syracuse cannot allow the same type of steady, consistent, just power running all the time, and you can't stop it.
Here's 7.
You can't let that happen.
Here's 9.
Not against this team.
No. Especially not after a trip across the country. And, if it starts at you under, this team has been reasonably strong mentally from week to week, and I think that's a Fran Brown effect this year for sure. And it's stuff that maybe we didn't see around here. When things started to go wrong the last few years, they went wrong. We've seen with Fran, they go wrong a week, and not that it's fixed the next week, but they're not like down at the dumps over it the next week. Yeah. That's what I'll be interested to see. If Cal starts running it on you early, like, does it get to them? Like, does it lead to frustration, which then leads to personal fouls and leads to the tires coming off? Or, okay, we'll keep it together.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I know that the offensive line was talked about last week a lot as far as Boston College getting a bunch of pressure, and they did. And that's certainly an issue going into this game. But for all of that, they still put up 400 yards and scored 31 points.
Mm-hmm.
And this feels like a game on both sides of the ball where the team that turns it over the least is going to win. And again, to your point, I wonder if it plays out somewhat similar to the NC State game, in that NC State had success moving the ball, and then it seemed like every time they got in the red zone, they fumbled or threw an interception.
Yeah, something went terribly wrong.
Right. And so if Syracuse can do some similar things, meaning when Cal does get in the red zone, because they'll get into it a few times today, is limit them to field goals or turn them over, that completely changes the confidence level of your defense, the buzz on your sideline. You're protecting Kyle McCord. Syracuse's offense is moving the ball down the field and scoring. And then defensively, you're giving up field goals or turning them over. Your whole team is going to start believing, like, who cares if they move between the 20s? We got this.
Yeah, and you look at Cal, you speak of turnovers. Obviously, turnovers are always an exceedingly important factor in a game. Cal is one of the best turnover teams in the country, both in margin and forcing it. They have 17 interceptions on the year, so that is something that the Orange will have to be minding their P's and Q's on today for sure. All right, let's take our last break here in our pregame show. We'll get predictions for the game, some more football facts when we come back, and get you all set up for a busy doubleheader Cuse game day of Youngstown State and Cal in basketball in the Dome, and then football out on the West Coast. Final break, back after this. Cuse Sports Talk, ESPN Radio.
Same starting 5 for men's basketball.
Field hockey lost yesterday, Tim. There you go. There's your other Cuse Sports update. Field hockey had a path paved to the Final Four, and he yacked it in overtime against Harvard. Soccer had a down season. Women's soccer stinks. The Northeast Regionals are today for cross country. Are you up on your what's happening in Northeast Regionals action? I used to be more plugged into
that. What happened with the volleyball team? Did they lose in the ACC tournament or whatever?
There is no ACC tournament, is there?
No, there isn't?
No, it's weird. I don't think their season's over, unless they changed it. There never used to be an ACC tournament, which just felt odd.
They posted something the other day, and I guess I had assumed that that was part of the ACC tournament. I guess.
No, unless they changed it, the volleyball season is like longer than everything else is getting into postseason, and they are probably still in regular season.
Oh, they lost to 15th.
Is Tim Leonard calling the basketball game? Yes, Tim, on the radio. I don't know who's doing TV today. Who is doing TV today?
Because Matt Park is down at Cal, right?
Matt is in Cal.
They have students doing it, maybe?
It's possible.
Would make sense.
This will be a test of the game notes.
I did.
Yeah. Here's a question. Who do you think's starting at quarterback next year? Do we know their name yet?
No.
Okay.
That's my guess.
That's my thought as well.
Georgia Tech crushed them yesterday. Syracuse is 14-13, but they're 2-13 in the ACC.
Yeah.
Rough.
For up until like a week or two ago, they were undefeated non-con and only defeated in con, but they've picked up a couple of ACC wins. They were 0-10 in ACC play, I think, for a while.
10-0 in non-conference.
Yeah. All right. Do the game notes have Jack Gordon, a recently graduated Syracuse student who's very good, and Devo on the TV today.
Okay. Devo makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jack he was the top. I think he's graduated. He was the top student like last year. He's local. I want to say he went to FM.
Okay.
JD, FM, one of the ones with the letters.
I did see there was a Newhouse student that kept posting yesterday, Kiyan Anthony is committed to Syracuse before, like while the announcement was going on, but before he'd announced
Before it was announced, yeah.
And like I sent him a message. I was like, dude, the announcement's still going on. He hasn't said anything.
It's like we all know what's happening.
And then so he deleted it, and then 3 minutes later tweeted the same thing. I'm like, nope, still hasn't announced. And then so he deleted it, and then 2 minutes later he tweeted the same thing again. I was like, dude, just watch the announcement.
It's like they're doing a thing. Swearing like sailors.
I didn't understand the need to.
No. Is McCord the only quarterback on the team who is out of eligibility? Yes.
I think so.
I think so.
Right. Yeah.
Lost track of the life and times of Carlos Del Rio Wilson.
I think he's still got another year.
I think he does. Michael Johnson, I want to say, has like a 6th year because of all his injuries.
I thought he was done.
He might be done?
I thought he was done.
Maybe. Am I mixing that up with Nixon? Am I mixing up my coach's kids?
Maybe. I mean, Johnson is listed as a senior, but he's only played in 3 seasons.
Yeah. He feels like somebody that they might be able to concoct another year of eligibility for if they put their minds to it.
Del Rio Wilson's listed as a junior. But yeah, I don't know if they filed for medical or medical whatever, if he'd be given another year. If he even wants to do that, he might not want to.
Right. Like my best guess is the same as Mike's, that whomever is starting the Tennessee game next year is not currently on the roster.
Yeah. Thomas Castellanos.
The portal moves quick.
I would if I'm Syracuse, I'm not going after that kid. No offense to him. I don't think he fits what Fran wants. A guy who can't throw.
No, not at all.
Toyota Pregame Show.
Then it is. Pre-games. Pluralize it. We're getting you ready for both hoops and football. We'll get predictions here in a second. Let's get a little more football. A little worrisome on the back end right now, Mike. All of the cornerbacks are hurt, just seemingly.
Everybody.
Yeah, Clarence Lewis is still there, but Fran, I feel like, he does it so casually. I feel like every Thursday, either on his show or on Orange Nation, or this week it was Wednesday, not Thursday, it just blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Jaden Bellamy's out, blah, blah. Wait, what'd you just say? Like, he just snuck that one in, or last week is blah, 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 so-and-so's out for the year. And it's just like, oh. Like, the injuries, I think, are mounting on this team more than we've necessarily realized or talked about.
It makes you wonder, are they going to throw Devin Grant or Deuce Chestnut back at corner at some point? Do they have to?
Yeah, I mean, Grant would be the one that was a corner in literally this system this season.
Yeah.
Deuce, they moved back in the spring. Like last week, we definitely saw some. Do we see Greg Delane out there? I mean, seen some Ibn McDaniels. We saw some Davian Kerr. At least I saw him out on the field. And I don't know if it was any of them. I don't know which way to point a finger, if there one person needs the finger pointing at on the blown coverage on the 4th and 1 in the end zone. But there's a lot of youth on the back end right now. We talk about why do mistakes happen on the back end, things like that, when there's a bunch of guys out there for the first time.
Yeah, now Delane is the guy who's been in your program the longest.
Yeah.
But they're all new to the system.
Yeah.
And even though he's been in the program, he doesn't have a lot of playing experience.
No.
So you still have inexperienced guys.
Like, I definitely noticed Davian Kerr on the field last week. I'm like, oh, that's new.
Yeah. Now, I know they're very high on him, his talent. He's got some good speed and whatever else. I know they're also really high on Ibn McDaniels.
Yep.
So it wouldn't surprise me if you see one or both of them out there.
Ibn's a fantastic name, by the way. IBN.
I know.
It feels like it's missing a lot of letters, but I like it.
It does.
Yeah.
He was an interesting recruitment. But regardless, I think if it was me having watched zero practice, I want to see what Ibn McDaniels has. So I'd throw him out there just because I want to, from a selfish perspective, I know what he was in high school. I know how highly the coaching staff thought of him coming out of high school, and I want to see him play at the college level and see what he can do. But, we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw all 3 of them out there at different points. Along with Devin Grant coming down at different points.
Yeah, Devin Grant. I mean, obviously, Clarence Lewis is the one remaining healthy initial starter of the group of 3 or 4 starters at cornerback that is still listed at cornerback in the program. So we'll keep an eye on that. And again, it's keeping an eye up front, right? Like, Fran has done, I'd say he's mostly done a job of not complaining about the roster he was left, right? Or things about this. I'd say it's been rare it's come up. This week, though, he started dropping more of like, man, some of the veterans, they're just not big enough, like weight room stuff. And he's talking about, and clearly he was talking about Murad Watson and Rashad Perry being big guys that are freshmen up front, because those are the two that are playing. But like, where else is the beef to stop the run? And that's something to watch out for today.
Yeah, well, and the fact that they lost their two starting defensive tackles from the opening day roster,
right?
That's playing a part too. And I think that's kind of where his frustration is. It's like, I thought I had 4 or 5 guys that I could rotate in there, and now only 2 of those guys are left, and the other guys that I can throw in there just aren't really big enough to do what I want to do.
Right.
I think what we've seen from Murad Watson all season, and the last couple of weeks from Rashard Perry, I think we've seen some positive things.
Like, they're clearly going to be players.
Yes,
but they're freshmen.
Exactly. And so it's rough when your best defensive tackles are freshmen, and even if they are large human beings, they're still freshmen, and so their bodies aren't completely transformed yet. Like Murad Watson, I think, is going to chisel out a little bit, and he's going to transform his body. I think he's going to be a really good player.
When a 24-year-old, 6th-year guard starts pushing on you,
right?
Yeah, sometimes you get moved.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough situation for Syracuse with the injuries at the one position you felt you were least capable of absorbing it.
Right.
Was at defensive tackle. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes today, because Cal has struggled to run the ball and Syracuse has struggled to stop it. So who wins that battle?
Yeah, and based on last week, Cal would be foolish not to at least test it out to see if they can win the battle. If you don't do that, I question your coaching strategy going forward. And again, like Syracuse offensive line, we've seen rotation all year long. I'll be intrigued to see how that goes, or if we get more Woolable at left tackle, or how that sorts out this week.
Yeah, I would like to see him more at left tackle. I thought
Weatherspoon struggled last week. He
certainly did, and I thought the offensive line solidified, and Syracuse had their best drives when Woolable was out there.
Yeah,
so I'd like to see him out there a little bit more. That's me personally. Obviously, again, I don't see practice. I don't know what those conversations are like, and
Fran
that goes,
clearly he says it every week. He relies heavily on what's happening in practice to make those decisions.
Yes, 100%, and I get that, and a lot of people do, and I mean, Jim Boeheim was famous for doing that. If you don't play in practice, you're not playing in the games and all of that. But we'll see how it plays out. It's definitely going to be interesting. That's certainly the left tackle rotation is going to be something I'm paying attention to.
All right, and you got to watch out for Xavier Carleton, who of course wears number 44 for Cal. Go figure, who's their leading sack guy.
Of course.
Yeah. So if anybody's waiting for some weird karma day, that's your start to it. If stuff happens weird today, it's because their leading sack guy's wearing 44, and it will all spin off from there. All right, let's get some predictions. Youngstown State. Do we? Yeah. We got to be dramatically wrong before these games start, Mike. That's how it goes. Nobody will remember. Basketball game. What are you feeling?
I think Syracuse is going to come out and play well today. I'll pick them 81-65 over Youngstown State.
Okay. I feel we may see the same game again. I went 82-75.
Okay.
So just a little another win where you don't feel great about life after Syracuse basketball this season. I do predict, though, we will see Naheem McLeod, because their center is 7'3".
That would be a good thing for rim protection. And the way that Syracuse has played these first 2 games, it kind of reminds me when I was growing up, something my dad used to always say is, I'd like to see a team that goes like undefeated, wins the national championship, but they only win every game by like a point. And so everyone all season is like, they're not any good. They're beating that crappy team only by a point. And then they go play a really good team and beat them, but by a point.
Your dad must love the Chiefs this year.
Fantastic. So, can Syracuse do that? What if they beat Youngstown State by 5, and then they go
21-0
they go beat Cal or Texas by 3?
Yeah, 21-0 combined margin, like 50 points.
And that would be amazing. All
right, football game. What do you got today, Mike?
Well, I've predicted Syracuse in every game so far this season. So
you are 6-3 in your predictions.
I am 6-3 in my predictions, but I'm going to do a little reverse jinx before the game starts.
The power
I'm
of the jinx.
Pick Cal 34-31.
Okay, I have also picked Cal to score 34 points.
Good for you.
I predicted Syracuse to score 35 points.
Oh, look at you! There's your 1-point victory.
Yes, I just think it's Cal keeps playing zany, close games.
They do.
Syracuse keeps playing zany, close games. If these teams, like they've been destined for months to play a ridiculous, zany, close game against each other, It has been foretold, therefore it will happen.
Maybe it'll happen by Syracuse missing 2 extra points and getting a safety.
Yeah, I didn't say they're getting to 35 on just 5 touchdowns.
Right.
And then Tom Brenneman may or may not have any idea what's happened during it, as we're watching on the CW later.
His ability to discern what math is in 2-possession games.
He's still trying to go for 2 last week. I almost broke the conference room last week, so we'll see how that goes. All right, basketball's starting soon. Listen all day on TK for both days. Watch basketball, ACC Extra, football on the CW. Cue Sports Talk after, post-game, both games. When football is over, get to Cue Sports Talk. We'll get through both games, post-game after, football, basketball, Red, Fran, your calls, the whole deal. All right, for Mike, I'm Brian. Enjoy the games, enjoy the day. We'll catch up after.
The Sports Show.